If you aren't familiar with the eponymous location or the series as a whole, Baldur's Gate 3 doesn't sound like that exciting a game. I mean, lacking context as a title, it's pretty meh. Given that the game has been in early access for literal years now, you've probably heard bits and pieces about it and maybe you've let those pass you by. But not anymore. This is your wake-up call. If you're a fan of high fantasy, D&D, role-playing, incredible storytelling, turn-based combat, huge consequences for your choices, and a lot of potential sexy times, never mind the title, this game is for you. And in this video, I'm going to explain exactly why you're going to want to play Baldur's Gate 3, even if, right now, you have no idea what or where Baldur's Gate is. So, first things first for the uninitiated. Baldur's Gate 3 is a Dungeons & Dragons game. Baldur's Gate itself is a city located in Faerun, one of the main settings of the Forgotten Realms, the collective name given to the world of Dungeons & Dragons. So everything in Baldur's Gate games, from the playable races and classes to the spells, items, creatures, and monstrosities, is pure D&D. If you haven't played the previous Baldur's Gate games, no worries, you won't be missing out on much context. The previous mainline Baldur's Gate titles, Baldur's Gate 1 and Baldur's Gate 2 Shadows of Amn, were developed by BioWare. Yes, that's Mass Effect and Dragon Age developer BioWare, all the way back in 1998 and the year 2000. Now, given it's been 25 years since the original, you will not be judged for never having played it, and the new studio behind Baldur's Gate 3, Divinity Original Sin developer Larian Studios, is rather presuming a large portion of their audience haven't. And also haven't played any of the spin-offs like 2001's Dark Alliance. In fact, the studio has said many times that it's made Baldur's Gate 3 with new players in mind, and that's new players to the video game series and D&D as a whole. So, it may have a 3 in the title, but this is not the kind of series where you have to come in prepared, especially since it's mostly a fresh bunch of characters and a brand new story. But let's rewind a bit first though. In the 25 years since the original game launched, heck, in the last 9 years since D&D's 5th edition rulebooks were released, public perception of D&D has shifted seismically. And we all know that by now. What was once largely considered a niche hobby is now a cultural phenomenon, with blockbuster movies, actual play shows that sell out stadiums, luxury holidays where you do nothing but play with friends, mountains of merch of all kinds, and millions of new players finding their parties and adventuring into the Forgotten Realms. So there's a lot riding on a new D&D game right now. But even if you haven't played D&D before but were always interested, Baldur's Gate 3 may actually be the perfect introduction into the world. As we mentioned before, Larian has said that it wants to ensure that even players who have never played D&D before have a fun and comfortable time in BG3. To that end, they've made sure that all of the information is presented in steps, in a bite-sized, digestible manner, and all this information is based directly on the Player's Handbook, or PHB. That is essentially your basic rulebook for playing D&D. So, playing Baldur's Gate 3 is a great way to brush up on the actual D&D rule set, familiarize yourself with a lot of its quirks, learn which abilities and spells go with what races and classes, and even decide what classes or subclasses or even multi-classes you might want to play in a D&D campaign yourself later on down the line. And just like the real D&D experience, the class and race of your character can be super important to how you experience the world of Baldur's Gate 3. If you decide to create your own character, rather than choose an origin character, more on those in a little bit, there are 11 races to choose from. Elf, Tiefling, Drow, Human, Githyanki, Dwarf, Half-Elf, Halfling, Gnome, Dragonborn, and Half-Orc. The customization options in the character creator are absolutely wild, by the way. Sure, you have extensive skin, hair, and war paint options, as well as toggles and sliders for things like heterochromia and vitiligo, but you can also get super into specific and unique features, like facial hair for dwarves, tiefling horns and horn color, and scales and ridges for your dragonborn. Metallic and pearlescent scale options for dragonborns look gorgeous, by the way. There are also sub-races, like different colored dragon subclasses for Dragonborn that give special features. Look, we can already tell we are going to lose hours to this. And that's before you even get to your class. which we're sure people are going to seriously deliberate over for a long time before even starting the game. There are 12 classes to begin with: Cleric, Fighter, Ranger, Rogue, Warlock, Wizard, Druid, Sorcerer, Barbarian, Bard, Paladin, and Monk. Then there are, wait for it, around 48 subclasses to choose from. Though, true to D&D, some of these, like the Gloomstalker subclass for Rangers, won't be available until you progress a little bit more in the game. With so much variation and choice, especially when factoring in the fact that you can multi-class, that is, dabble a little in more than one profession, it is just as well that the game lets you respec as much as you like. Larian has said that one particular character, whose name begins with a W, will help players respec, and they encourage you to do this as much as you like to try out different paths and see what works for you. Given that the ability to do things unique to some classes, say access to the spell Speak with Animals for instance, can open up whole new quest pathways and dialogue trees within the game, not to mention the fact that different classes will be treated totally differently by NPCs depending on where you are and how you behave towards them, this gives Baldur's Gate 3 incredible replay potential, and it's a brilliant way to get a jump start on learning all of the different abilities and spells within a D&D campaign setting, how they might be applied in any given situation, how to use them creatively, and which might work best for any particular characters you have in mind to roleplay later. Also similar to an IRL D&D campaign, BG3 spans genres. As Birdie on the Eurogamer site noted at a recent and final preview of the game, later portions of the game featured a descent into horror not far removed from Silent Hill, a place of twisted surgeons with scalpels for fingers and nurses with rotten faces. Oh, and gore. Splattery amounts of gore. We forgot to mention before, but there's another origin character that you can choose to play as, by the way. The DarkUrge. Sounds lovely, right? Well, unlike the others, the DarkUrge can be customized however you like, just as though you were making an avatar from scratch. But they still have an extremely mysterious backstory to uncover, and some extremely twisted choices and consequences that, if you're not careful, can thin out your list of allies faster than you can say, blood on your hands. Larian has said that this character option is not for the faint of heart, but it sounds extremely intriguing for those after a bloodthirsty time. Those consequences we mentioned before, by the way, might be triggered by something you see, or by an intriguing option in dialogue that looks innocent enough, but is in actuality way more extreme than you could have imagined. Case in point, you can brutally murder a major companion in the game at the very beginning of it, which means they stay dead for your entire playthrough. Yeah, approach with caution. But if murder hoboing your way around town isn't your thing though, you can always make like a bard and seduce everyone and everything in sight. So romance options aren't all that unusual in these sorts of games, of course, but what is nice to see in BG3 is that alongside raunchy one-night stands with vampires and, bears, there are also options for long-term romances, polyamory, and even, marriage. I mean, usually, romances blossom at the very end of a game and we get to imagine where they go from there, but here, it seems like we get to actually see relationships develop and flourish over time. Or even fizzle out awkwardly depending on your luck. Oh, and awkward first dates? Baldur's Gate 3 has them. As an example, you can take Karlach, the fiery tiefling barbarian, to dinner. You can order food and drink, have weird exchanges with a grumpy orc waiter, get a little bit flirtatious, it's all very, very cute. The interesting thing to note is that the date takes place in Baldur's Gate itself, which the developer has said players visit in the third and final act of the game. The city is, by the way, as you'd imagine, absolutely enormous. It's enormous in spectacle and how many buildings and rooftops there are to explore. Great bridges with houses built on and around them, how the city sprawls across multiple maps. As Birdie noted in his preview, it is really loads and loads of different places all rolled into one. But as with so much else in BG3, it's also the density of the place, of the systems overlapping within it, that really gives it a feeling of size. It's having a seemingly never-ending amount of places and events to explore and people to talk to. It's in being able to go into prison and then break out again, or in being able to rob a bank that has an enormous underground vault beneath it. And it's in getting your name in the paper. One of the headline features of this city, pun intended, is a functioning, dynamic newspaper. Periodically, also pun intended, a new edition will be published with stories revolving around your impact on Baldur's Gate, and in turn, people in the city will react to what's in the newspaper. You can even give interviews to journalists who'll print them for everyone to read. Larian has said that everything you do in the previous 2 acts of the game leads into this city. In a sense, everything you've done prior is building towards you arriving there, and the choices you've made shape how the city and the people within it react to your arrival. That is ridiculously exciting. So, what else has Baldur's Gate 3 got to offer? Well, it's got a star voice cast, including Critical Role's Matthew Mercer, Resident Evil Village's Lady D herself, Maggie Robertson, Jason Isaacs, J.K. Simmons, and more besides. It's got tons of monsters that those with even a passing knowledge of D&D will recognise. Displacer beasts, mimics, mind flayers, owlbears, dragons of all colours. And it's got a pretty fascinating core story. You've got a mind flayer tadpole lodged in your brain and a limited amount of time in which to extract it before you become an evil brain-devouring tentacly cephalopod sorcerer. Or, hey, maybe you welcome that change. Anyway, it also features online multiplayer of up to 4 players, and turn-based combat based directly on the D&D 5e rule set, where you really do have to roll dice for skill checks, add your modifiers, apply advantage or disadvantage, and create your own luck based on the character you've rolled for yourself. And hey, if you're unsure of what any of what I've just said means, well, you can just play this game to find out and get comfy with D&D terminology before you seek out a group to play with. That is, of course, if you're feeling intimidated to start from scratch in a new party or IRL campaign.
The pulsing glow and organic lines of the device make it seem more like a beating heart than a machine.
Anyhow, all of that to say, do not be put off if you've never played a Baldur's Gate game before, or if you're brand new to the world of D&D. You are not alone, and this game was made with you in mind. And for D&D fans like me, well, it was made with us in mind too, and I will definitely be jumping in come launch day. Keep an eye on the channel in that case, because we have got lots of videos on BG3 coming up. And if you have any particular questions or suggestions for videos, like tips, class suggestions, hidden side quests, rating our favourite sexy scenes, and more, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Bye!
You are the chosen one.